"Ah, my Preceep," he called out, his voice aching with longing as he gently caressed her cheeks. He muttered about how beautiful she was, even going on to ask if that was what goddesses in myths looked like. Then her voice came, soft and gentle, as she confessed her love to him, Siegfried. She rejoiced in her mind, at last, success, or so she thought, until he suddenly grabbed her hand. "But maybe that's why other men are covering you." He proceeds to get on his knees as he admits, every time he sees their enraptured eyes, he imagines brutally killing them with his holy sword. He let out a soft chuckle at how ridiculous it was, a knight commander, tasked with protecting the nation by divine will, having such thoughts. He questioned how he could make her forever his. At that moment, flowing texts appeared in front of her with possible responses. She tightened her jaw before finally selecting the third option. Then the next minute, her face lit up, and as she pleaded with him to tell her if he finds a way, saying whatever it is she'll follow him. The floating text appeared again, this time it showed his affection level at 89. He smiled, satisfied with her answer, as he remarked that he knew she'd say that. His affection level increased again, this time it rose to 100. She sighed a breath of relief, ready to embrace him. At last her attempt was finally successful, until something went wrong. Her face went pale as she spotted the bottle of strange liquid in his hand. He stretched it to her, promising they both will be together forever if she drank that. She protested strongly, however, no matter what she said, her voice wouldn't come out. In the end, she could only offer a cheerful expression as she agreed to him. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She protested, she shot back at him, asking him to just die first. As the blood poured out of her mouth, she pondered on how she thought this time would be different. The fifth male character, Siegfried, even for him a happy ending didn't exist. A reverse harem game highly anticipated by the public, caged Preceep. Stunning illustrations and 5 male protagonists with different charms. However, the game flopped immediately after its release. A storyline that was excessively dark. Bleak endings that were hard to consider happy. Above all, the biggest problem was bugs that appeared for no discernible reason. Characters' dialogue swapped, saves erased, it became a mess of a game no one wanted to play. Right, except for her, Juian. She sat in the comfort of her own home enjoying the game when the game suddenly stopped working. Initially she thought it was her controller until a text popped up on the screen. She wondered if it was another bug, however it was strange, she'd never seen that bug before. She went to her bed in disappointment, she'd wanted to play the game for the first time and it bugged. Just after she fell asleep, her TV screen suddenly lit up, the game was ready to launch. And that was the beginning of everything. She jerks up all of a sudden and after taking a look around realizes she's in the middle of an ocean. Her face twists in anger as she curses Siegfried. She thought he was the nicest out of all of the male leads, so she had high hopes, but he poisoned her and he didn't even drink it himself. Her thoughts wander and she somehow recollects how after being trapped in that game, she tried everything to return to reality. The male leads. Those psychopathic people killed her dozens of times. Really, she scraped and clawed her way through. And yet, even after completing all routes, she found herself back there again. Even if she ended up being killed by Siegfried, she thought finishing all routes would let her escape. Suddenly the thought of her being trapped there, forced to live like that forever, pops into her mind, freezing her in place. Hundreds and thousands of times, dying meaninglessly. A floating wall suddenly appeared in front of her. This time, the text read that all male characters had been fully completed and a secret mode will now begin, allowing her to now court the true male protagonist. She flew into a rage, yelling that that wasn't part of the plan, but then she suddenly stopped when an idea came up. If she courts the true male protagonist, can she finally end the game and return to her world? She lit up as she agreed to demanding the system tell her who it is so she can get started with her mission. However, the system suddenly disappeared. She searched around for the system, repeating her question, trying to figure out when it had gone, until a familiar chilling voice froze her in place. Preceep. And once, she realized. Her tattered clothes were miraculously restored, her hair nearly arranged. And that wretched scenery, in particular, that wretched voice. The game begins again. Later, a maid walks in asking if she was awake. She bites her lip hard as the usual floating text appears in front of her. In the end, she goes with the last option, asking Ella what the matter is. It was the same tiresome choices she'd faced hundreds of times, and then, Dietrich. The maid informs her the Emperor, Dietrich, has ordered her to escort her to the palace. Of course. Dietrich, Adaloya's tyrant emperor. Her first conquest target, and the very person who locked her in the royal tower. The maid urged her to move quickly, asking if she was trying to waste time to get her into trouble. The same options appeared again. This time she wondered if she really had any choices there. Option 1 and 3 both lead to bad endings where she dies. She went to the palace where Dietrich, the emperor, and the first male protagonist sat with an unreadable expression. She presented herself at his service, and before she realized, the palace was filled with Dietrich's laughter as he remarked that even after being stripped of her status, she acts as though she's still royalty, living in the palace like that. She stood with pent-up anger, wondering why he summoned her to the palace, and was still complaining. If he hated the sight of her so much, he should have just kicked her out, but she knew too well, he couldn't do that. Dietrich Adaloya, once a Grail and introverted prince plagued by frequent illnesses. Though the eldest son with a legitimate claim to the throne, he was overshadowed by the emperor's favored second son born to a concubine. Adding to his misfortune, his mother, the empress, died of illness, leaving him alone in the palace. And then appeared before him, a girl. Principe. A princess of lowly birth, born of a concubine and ignored by the emperor. The two, both outcasts of the royal palace, quickly became close friends. Before long, Principe became someone irreplaceable to Dietrich. So, when it was revealed that Principe was not truly of royal blood, before she even had a chance to say goodbye, she was cast out of the palace, and the prince believed she'd left him. She was leaving him too for the second prince, just like everyone else. That was the misunderstanding Dietrich came to believe. After overthrowing the second prince and his faction in a bloody coup, Dietrich ascended the throne. His first order of business was then deploying soldiers to capture Principe. And when they brought her, he ordered them to lock her up, at the top of the palace's western tower. She stood in the present, twisting her head as she thought. More than obsession, it was more like twisted love, and no matter how much she tried to explain that she wasn't leaving him for the second prince, he wouldn't listen. He wasn't interested in resolving everything through words. She wondered what the use of having a voice was if she constantly freezes up in front of the male protagonists, unable to say anything outside the system-permitted lines. He called her a vile little girl, but she just stayed silent. After he went silent, she instinctively looked up to find the floating text above his head displaying his affection level at 0. Floating texts appeared in front of her again. She considered how she'd always chosen the first option and decided to do something different. She didn't plan on building affection with Dietrich from the beginning. She chose the last option, thinking confident it'll raise his affection level the least, but just as she was about to choose, a new option appeared. She ended up going with the third option, her sudden concern startling him. She didn't meet his gaze, she just continued. She mentioned how he often caught colds around that time as a child. She explained that she was only concerned and apologized for overstepping. She looked up to find out if she'd avoided a bad end, but she didn't expect Dietrich to suddenly lunge at her. He yanked her hair, his voice devoid of warmth as he asked, "Concerned?" His voice dropped this time, replaced by true curiosity. "You are concerned about me?" Then his tone rose sharply as he told her he doesn't believe a word she says, especially when it comes from someone like her. Just as she wondered if she'd made the wrong choice, a floating panel appeared displaying an increase in Dietrich's favorability level. He let go of her hair and she dropped to the floor. She sat with a bewildered expression, as she pondered on how she'd been able to choose until then because she feared her death, and now the system was giving her 5 points for that. Dietrich on the other hand stood with a mix of pain, disappointment and betrayal, his eyes full as he accused her of betraying him and now trying to regain his favor with shallow attempts like that. He clenched his fist as if trying to hold back his feeling before informing her the coronation celebration will be held the next day. A sharp jolt shot through her as his words echoed in her mind. Dietrich's imperial coronation celebration, the game's first fixed event, the place where 3 male characters will appear. Dietrich continued, his eyes still dull as he brought up how some were already aware of her existence, so perhaps it would be good to attend. He asked what she planned to do, and again, the tiresome floating texts appeared in front of her. She urged herself not to panic and instead considered how the favorability level increases with option 2 and 3. However, Dietrich, who wants to restrain her, wouldn't welcome her attendance. And the last one, she perceives, inevitably ends in her death. So she goes with the first option, pleading with him to allow her to attend. He agreed, guessing she also needed a way to interact with others, so it makes sense. She stood in shock, nothing was making sense at all. The result of her choice was different from how it was before. Normally she'd ruthlessly get kicked out. A floating panel appears again, this time it tells her if she reattempts to pursue the male character who she has already completed an ending with, she will uncover secrets that were not known in the normal mode. He ended up kicking her out, noting no matter how hard she tries, nothing will change. She stood outside the palace confused, completely unaware of what was really happening. What was with the golden choice? Is it a bug? Is the plot changing? And the fact that Dietrich's dialogue has changed means there's a high chance other characters will also change in this mode. She drifted into thought. She'd already met the first male protagonist, Dietrich. Noah, Ivan, Siegfried, Adder, now 4 remain. The Duke of the North, Noah Dvern. Someone who treated others like trash. He said he was going to show her art, but he locked her in a warehouse instead. He abandoned her just like that when he lost interest in her. Ivan, the Archmage of Ataloya. In order to isolate her and make her rely only on him, he manipulated her mind, driving her to madness. The Knight Commander, Siegfried. She thought he would at least be sane, but... At last, Adder, the prince of the neighboring country Thane. With a rare beautiful hair color, dignified and handsome, at the coronation celebration, fooled by that appearance. In the present she stumbled against her own foot and fell to the ground. Before she can even pick herself up, she hears a familiar voice call her. It was Prince Adder. A wave of horror washed over her as those familiar floating texts appeared in front of her and her mind exploded with questions. How is Adder already appearing? According to the storyline, they were supposed to meet at the coronation celebration. Was that another bug? He took her feet gently, intending to help her into her shoe, but that brief encounter brought horrifying memories of their time together. He put shackles on her entire body, like a deranged man, locking her up in a cage like an animal, thinking it would be quite exquisite. That memory filled her with disgust. She scrambled to press anything in a hurry to get out of there. Suddenly she got a notification that the game would reset if no choice was made within the time limit. She was filled with even more panic. There's never been anything like that, and on impulse she pressed the golden option. She helped herself up before raising her head to confront him, demanding to know if it was him, he'd be okay. Realizing what she'd done, she immediately panicked, wondering what she should do. She looked up to check his affection level, but it only had question marks, something that had never happened before. Just as she shook in fear, wondering what was happening, a knight suddenly calls the prince and informs him that it's time to leave. However, he simply waved him off before turning back to Preceep. She held her hands up in fear, trying to explain that wasn't what she meant, that she was just so startled and she pressed it by mistake as a result, until she suddenly paused. She placed her hands over her mouth in shock as she realized she was actually talking. She wondered how that was possible. After all, no matter how much she struggled in front of the male leads, she could only speak a dialogue picked by the system. Adder tried to point out something, but she wasn't paying the slightest attention to him. In a move to confirm what's happening, she tears her dress and everything finally starts making sense. The dress isn't restoring itself, it always immediately reverted to its original settings before. Adder's eyes softened as he suggested she returns now. He reached for her hand, offering to escort her, however, she quickly snatched her hands away, a loud no, following her action. Then she turned away, apologizing for the rudeness. Adder stood behind, he fixed his gaze on his palm, the memory of how he'd helped her into her shoe filling his head. Then the next minute he clenched his fist, his thoughts slipping out afterwards. I believe there was one newly made somewhere, a very thick one at that. However, before he could hold the thought, he was suddenly struck by a sharp splitting headache. The image of a young lady, with shackles around, calling out to him, crying about how much it hurts. Pleading with him, while he pulled her along. Later he stared at his hand, wondering what had just happened. He was absorbed in that he didn't realize there was a man watching from the side. On the other hand, Preceep returned to her room. She held her dress that was still torn and reminisced on how ever since she pressed the golden option, the system failed to load the data. The dress could burn for all she cared, but surely, that didn't mean she wouldn't be able to save the game anymore, right? Immediately the only reason why she's been bold so far came to her mind, it was because she could save. But, game over means eternal death. She parted her lips, her voice rising louder each time as she asked to save her progress, but only a floating panel appeared telling her saving was unavailable in secret mode. In this moment, her whole resolve came crashing as she considered what that meant. It is making her choose, now that there's no way to go back. Either she keeps endlessly repeating the ending she already knows, hundreds, thousands of times, or risks her life to find the real male lead and escape from that place. She pulled her hair in frustration as she mumbles about how she didn't even know who the real male lead was, nor did she have any hints. The floating panel appeared again, this time it asked her if she'd like to activate the secret mode's new feature. She chose yes without hesitation, and a book appeared. The book would allow her access to records from the normal mode, also it records new information discovered about characters in the secret mode. Changing her approach, she asks it to show information about the real male lead, but it replies that undiscovered information cannot be accessed. A new feature got added to the incident log, Book of Memories. She could revisit old memories. Also, by accessing the Book of Memories, she can use existing system features and save points. She can also uncover hints about targeted characters. Which simply means she can't save but will be able to use the system more freely now. She realizes there are hints about the real male lead too, however, just as she attempts to access the information, a panel asking her to enter the password appears. The hint being the real male lead's name. Accepting defeat, she decides to go with the Book of Memories, thinking to figure something out, however the information she finds freezes her in place. The book was blank. She couldn't see anything at all. She called up the Book of Memories again and nothing happened. It was just like before, she couldn't see anything. Was that another bug? Before she could figure it out, Adder's incident log suddenly opened. It brought up past memories and those scenes. She could confirm she's indeed seen them so many times in the previous route. She remembered them clearly, but something was wrong. Adder's face, she couldn't see it. Immediately she asked to see all the others make leads, and after a tiresome comparison, she realizes everyone except Adder is fine. Their unexpected encounter comes to her mind and she finally understands her choosing the golden option must be the reason why everything's changed. She doesn't know what's going to happen to Adder, and the fact that the Book of Memories won't open must be connected to that reason, and worrying about it won't solve anything. As a precaution going forward, she resolved to avoid that option at all costs. The day of the coronation banquet, she walked through the hall, guessing she'll have to see Adder after all. And then maybe, the real protagonist might show up. Later in the reception, she walked around with a glass of wine in her hands, looking around for any sign of the real protagonist, but she didn't spot any affection marks anywhere. She took a gulp of the drink before hurrying out of the banquet hall to attend the next event. As she walked, she quietly pondered on everything. The most crucial part of the event, the first meeting with the protagonists. In the garden she meets Adder and exchanges greetings with him, and on the way back she runs into Noah at the Imperial Palace. Under Dietrich's orders, Siegfried takes her to the tower and the event ends. Normally Adder should appear soon, but in light of recent events, a part of her silently questions if he'll even show up at all. But that spark of doubt is quickly killed when a voice calls her. She turns around to find Noah, one of the male leads, asking what she's doing alone in a place like that. She greets him with composure, but inside her was a turmoil. She wondered why she was meeting Noah instead and why it wasn't Adder. He shared without hesitation that he'd been very curious about her. Red hair and beautiful face, anyone would be mesmerized by his looks, at least that is until they find out what a lunatic he really is. She responds with a picture-perfect smile, sharing that she's even surprised he knows her at all. He responds stating, amongst those who frequent the Imperial Palace, there's no one who doesn't know of her. With his eyes locked onto her, he remarks that he has a fondness for beautiful things, which made him only more curious about her. Whether she truly lives up with what everyone's been talking about. Now, he thinks he understands why such rumors have been going around. She flashed him a gentle smile as she feigned ignorance, asking what he meant. He extends his hand forward and asks to join her on her walk since she was out enjoying some fresh air. She was momentarily stunned, and just then a voice rings out from behind, stating Principe had already made a promise to him. Adder stepped out from the corner, his brow furrowed. He walks up to them and asks Noah to move, noting he will personally escort Principe. Noah ended up taking his leave, leaving Principe standing nervously behind Adder, wondering why he's showing up now. Principe, you're not just an ordinary noble lady, you're the princess who was stripped of her title due to her mother's disgrace. I have something to ask you. Adder finishes. You. Do we know each other? Shocked, she could only manage a soft, pardon? Adder repeated himself. He asked again if they'd met somewhere before. She tries to speak, but the weight of the moment crashes down on her, leaving her silent. Noticing her reaction, he remarks that it doesn't seem as though he has completely lost his mind. Previously, when he heard her voice in his head. When the pictures flooded his mind, he wondered if it was a vision, but after more thought, he realized it was too vivid to be called a vision. Which led him to the last possibility. What kind of memory is this? Back to the present, he asked her why she was wearing shackles he hadn't put on her yet. Who are you? She wondered what it is he was even saying. It was as though memories of a previous cycle were returning back to him. Now she'd confirmed it, that wasn't some bugged dimension. Everything was strange. Not only can she speak freely in front of Adder now, but by his behavior and tone, he doesn't feel like a programmed character who's repeating the same preset lines anymore. It's more like he's become a real person, possessing his own consciousness. Outside her thoughts, Adder's voice comes again, this time more chilly. I see you don't intend to answer. Then I'll make you speak. He grabbed her arm without warning, then like a lunatic, he stated that if he were to create the events of that memory, perhaps she'll open her mouth. The next minute, he pulled out shackles from coat, then he held her hands together while she pleaded with him to stop. Just as he was about to put the shackles on her, she hit his foot and afterwards delivered a resounding slap across his cheek. He turned back to her, his voice rising in anger as he demanded to know what she was doing, but the sight in front of him left him startled. She was trembling with tears in her eyes. Seizing the opportunity, she fled despite him calling her back. Through the brief interaction, he confirmed there was most definitely something weird about her, but he didn't worry, there was still time. He'll make her confess, no matter what it takes. He felt someone appear behind him and instinctively turned to look, only for the color to drain completely from his face. Principe, on the other hand, ran until her whole body gave out. Nothing was making sense again, instead it was a total chaos. She realizes now that the button must have disconnected Adder from the system, allowing him to gain his own consciousness. Her thoughts begin to spiral. What if the others start regaining their memories too? What happens if all the others gain consciousness too? If they can't be saved or controlled anymore? Suddenly, a sharp scream quickly startles her out of her thoughts. The prince's knight had found the prince laying unconscious in his own pool of blood and immediately announced the murder of the prince. Once she arrived at the scene, she trembled from shock. Her thoughts blurred as she could only manage a few words like, "Who on earth could have done such?" Dietrich appeared behind her and after spotting the prince immediately orders all the palace gates to be sealed and an identification of everyone who's left the banquet hall. He turned to Preceep afterward and asked why she was there. He asked her to explain why she was there, ordering her to speak that minute. A knight sensing the shift tried to speak for her, pointing out how much distress she appeared to be in only for his attempt to get shut down by Dietrich. He shot him a cold glare as he warned that he wasn't speaking to him. Just then, a calm voice came through the commotion, pleading with the emperor to calm down. The emperor's response was simple. "You're late. Grand Duke Fenric." She studied him with confusion, wondering who he was, only for them to lock eyes. He offered a polite bow before turning back to the emperor. He reported that the crown prince's guard was already searching for the prince and it'd be best if he met him first. He continued stating they couldn't let them see him in that state and Dietrich immediately ordered Siegfried to stand by, leaving the escort of Lady Preceep to the Grand Duke. The Grand Duke turned to her in an instant and then asked her to come with him. She was confused but she followed him regardless, he who trampled on even the dead. Minutes into their walk he broke the silence, mentioning it must have been so frightening for her. He explained that it was most likely the work of an assassin, saying after all an even like that was the ideal setup for an assassination attempt. He continued stating since Adar was only the fourth prince and far behind in the imperial power struggle, the Thane Empire wouldn't want to upset Adaloya over someone like him. It's likely they'll sweep it under the rug, so there's no need to worry, he gently assured her. She followed behind the Duke, her mind filled with so many questions. Was the Grand Duke a secret mode NPC? His face seemed so unfamiliar and there was no affection gauge for him. But, even more than that, with how captivating he looked, was he really just a supporting character? She was so lost in thought she didn't pay attention to her steps and ended up stumbling. However, she was caught by the Grand Duke. He checked to see if she was okay and she responded by thanking him. Her eyes widen the minute she realizes she can actually talk. Even though he's a supporting character, there aren't any choices appearing before her. She calls his name weakly and to her surprise he remarks that she's quite articulate now and he's glad they can have a proper conversation now. She asks if they've met before, following with an apology as she tells him that is the first time she's meeting him. He responds with a simple, "I see," before explaining that as someone so close to the emperor, he spent most of his time on the battlefield, so perhaps she didn't have the chance to see him. Just as she tries to piece all the information together she hears his voice. This time he tells her it doesn't matter. He continued stating from then on she'll learn many more things as they'll be meeting quite often. That night she returned to the tower while the Grand Duke remained outside, then he slowly parted his lips, mumbling something unclear. So, this is only the first step. On the other hand, the floating panel revealed something stranger to Preceep. Adar, he no longer existed. He was gone, as though he never existed. She tried looking for the Grand Duke's information and to her shock the system told her he didn't exist. At that point she wondered if he was too minor a character, so she tried searching for another person. As she suspected, the system brought up information on an even similar minor NPC like Ella. At this point she grew even more anxious, her heartbeat grew increasing louder, her head filled with all kinds of questions. Could it be that he doesn't? Who is that man? That man scares me, for some reason he gives me the creeps. For some reason his last words echoed loudly in her mind. It doesn't matter if you don't know. From now on, you'll learn many more things. Finally she collapsed to the ground. The true male protagonist or whatever, with a game that was riddled with bugs. What then was she supposed to even do? In a new scene, her eyes flutter open and she notices she isn't back in the palace but back to her room, in her original world. She wonders if it was a dream, if she was seeing things, but those doubts fade quickly once she spots the game still logged in on her TV set. In one swift motion, she unplugs her TV. She forces a smile onto her lips as she agrees there's no such thing as being thrown into a game's world, something that absurd couldn't happen. The next minute she hurried to the mirror, confident such would be impossible, until she found herself as Preceep. At once, the relief faded off her face. She traced her face with her fingers, insisting that she wasn't Preceep. She tried to recall her own name, but in the end she crouched down on the floor, her voice shaky as she questioned, "What was my name again?" She heard a voice call her, then his voice came again, sending a chill through her. "You can't go anywhere. Ever." She woke up to a voice calling her with tears streaming down her face. It was Dietrich. She looked around, realizing it had only just been a dream. Dietrich looked conflicted, trying to force some words out while she remained still. His grip tightened around her arm, and the next minute he asked her to wipe her tears and stand up as there was something he needed to ask her. Later, she looks up at him, almost emotionless. Then he began to speak. He mentioned that he'd heard something from Noah Dvern and without wasting time demanded to know what she was doing with Adder Hanan in the garden the previous day. The usual floating texts appeared, however this time, they were all golden options, almost as if the system had realized she planned to avoid the golden options with all her strength, almost like they're forcing her to pick. She ended up going with the third option and narrated how she had gone to the garden to get some fresh air, but Noah stopped her. Then Adder suddenly appeared and chased him away, and after that, he tried to do something strange to her, and as a result, she hit him with some bread and ran away. Dietrich's jaw tightened, his veins popped as he repeated her words in the form of a question, asking her to explain clearly. Something strange? She asked if he could recall the chain on the corpse's neck before revealing he tried to forcibly put it on her. She continued and explained that after she ran away, she heard that Prince Adder had died, and she was so shocked she went back to check. Her eyes darted to Dietrich's affection level, and just like she suspected, it had changed, leaving her to wonder if that meant she wouldn't see any more choices in dialogue form for him. And if after that he would regain the memories from his past, even the truth about who killed her? He clenched his fist before delivering a harsh warning that she'd better not be lying. Then as he walked away, he asked her not to even think of making anything up, saying he planned to ask Noah Dvern as well again. Still, just as his hand rested on the door handle, he turned to her, leaving one last comment. Still, he never thought she was the type of person to slap a man across the face, especially since she always acts like a lifeless doll in front of him. She sat with a confused expression, questioning what had just happened. For a second there, he almost sounded like he was sulking. But she couldn't waste time on that. She recalled the dream and wondered if it was only just a nightmare. Also, she recalled her name. Juian. Also, the only thing she could recall was of her wanting to play the game for the first time. Before that, what was I doing? Before that, she couldn't recall anything before that. Anything except that, from when she was Juian. In a new scene, Noah greets his guest, the Grand Duke, with a simple gesture. They sat together in silence while Noah snuck glances at the Grand Duke, recalling how he'd said he was there to investigate the death of Prince Adder, but it's been tens of minutes and all he's done is sip tea. He eventually decides to speak first. He asks if the tea is to his taste, disclosing that it's made from rare tea leaves that are brought over from the north. However, the Grand Duke simply responds saying he wouldn't know, since he doesn't usually enjoy tea. Still, Noah responds claiming it's still an honor. He tried it, adding that he's heard so much about the Grand Duke. He drops the tea as he repeats his words in the form of a question. A quiet chuckle escapes him before he notes that he is now genuinely curious, since stories about him are usually terrible. His red eyes sharpen with a piercing intensity as they settle fully on Noah, and the weight of that gaze startles Noah enough to stiffen. The Grand Duke simply ponders on the rumors about him. That he's a bloodthirsty monster who slaughters humans on the battlefield? Or perhaps, a low-born bastard who, without any regards for nobles or royals, decapitates them without hesitation? A monster. Noah nervously brings up the Grand Duke's unmatched swordsmanship, explaining that he meant no disrespect. The Grand Duke simply asks that they set the idle chatter aside and discuss Prince Adder. Noah tells him he's already told the Emperor everything he knows, that he encountered Principe and Prince Adder in the garden at the banquet, then he took his leave. The Grand Duke responds dryly saying he sees until Noah mentions there was something quite strange. He explains that it seemed like Prince Adder and Lady Principe already knew each other. She said she had a prior engagement with him. He mentions how she rarely leaves the tower, so it's uncommon for her to meet anyone at the palace. He rests finger on his lip lightly as he adds that he knows it's not his place to interfere, but it seemed like something happened between them. The Grand Duke's voice comes sharp and unmistakable. Immediately he asks if what Noah is suggesting is that Lady Principe is connected to Prince Adder's death. Noah quickly denies it. He explains that it was only just a personal opinion of his, agreeing it must have been an assassin after all. I see, that was helpful, the Grand Duke responds. However, just as he turns to leave, he mentions he's heard he has quite a refined taste in art collections. He flashed him a gentle smile as he continued, explaining that he's only just developed an interest in it himself and he was searching for a companion with an equally discerning eye. Noah simply stares at the Grand Duke in shock, but the Grand Duke doesn't stop there. He tells him he already knows he doesn't usually socialize actively with the other nobles, but he thought that might be a good opportunity to converse with him. Finally, he adds that he's been quite curious about his artistic perspective for some time, asking what he thinks. A smile appears on his lips as he thinks it's such a catch. He was only just lamenting how the Dvern family has been losing support with the Emperor's key supporters, and now, Duke Fenric, the Emperor's closest confidant, is approaching him. He expressed his gratitude for the Grand Duke's suggestion and followed with how he's been terribly bored with the nobility of late since none of them seem to appreciate the finer art. He offers to show the Grand Duke his whole life there as it's promising it's filled with truly beautiful pieces. Later, he pulls the door open, inviting the Duke in his gallery. Sculptures crafted by foreign artisans, paintings by wandering artists, jewelry that was crafted intricately, his collection was quite diverse. But the things that come out on top are his monster taxidermies. The Duke agrees with him, calling them beautiful. He asks if he usually comes there alone, and Noah responds that he has maids, but he always dismisses them in the afternoon. He flashed the Duke a smile as he remarked that he never knows when their filthy hands might ruin his collection, so he doesn't keep them around when he's not supervising. He reveals that he's also given them a few days off starting the afternoon the next day, so he'll be enjoying some solitude during that time. The Duke responds saying he sees, however, his next words send a chill through Noah. Then in that case, you're saying that if something was to happen to you right now, then no one would notice anything until tomorrow morning. Noah, startled, asks the Duke what he's saying all of a sudden, and the Duke simply explains that it's a joke. He advises him to be careful, saying with such precious items he has gathered there he might attract thieves. The Grand Duke points out a statue and asks if he'd acquired it at an auction as it's exceptionally beautiful. Lord Noah went on to explain while the Grand Duke simply shifted his attention to the door beside him. You're so beautiful, Principe, beautiful enough to be preserved as a taxidermy forever. Right there in front of that door, he saw Principe. And in his eyes, burnt something unmistakable. The second event, it started with a letter. Right after the banquet, the remaining forces of the former emperor, being overthrown, were captured. He immediately ordered their execution, and at the same time a secret letter discovered from amongst the criminals was discovered. The letter that changed everything. He crumpled the sheet, and the next scene shows his ordering Principe to confess. How is it that a secret only she and the entire empire knew came from the letter written by those criminals? She trembles in fear, her voice unsteady as she told him she didn't know. In the letter this much was written. Every year on the Empress's death anniversary, the Emperor's biological mother, he'd weep at her grave, all alone. Except for Precip, who stayed by his side, no one else knew this secret. This very fact led Precip to prison. Depending on who she encounters, the turning point will be decided and the story will progress. In the present, she stands in her room with some floating panels in front of her. Adder is dead and Dietrich is in a half-conscious state. She doesn't know if the banquet will continue as planned, but even after reviewing the entire system, there's nothing unusual. Something unusual did appear: a church. She was confident it wasn't there before and wondered if it could be a newly discovered area. Her maid's voice suddenly strikes her out of her thoughts. She extended her arms to the side, trying to stop her from seeing the floating panels, while her maid just stood wondering why she was suddenly acting like that. She suggested she step outside, revealing there was a guest there. Later, she sits with the Grand Duke. He apologized if his sudden visit had caught her a bit off guard, but she just waved it off, asking that they focus on what he came there to say instead. Without wasting time, he reveals that Prince Adder's group returned to the Thane Empire that morning, informing her that it wouldn't escalate further and instead end just like that. She asks if he's figured out who did it, and he responds saying he still didn't know that, but the investigation will be conducted separately from Thane's diplomacy, so there's no need for her to be worried. She lowers her gaze, a soft, "I see," leaving her lips. Then she mentions since he'd come there just for that, and if there's nothing he wishes to hear, she would report everything back to him. He doesn't say anything much. He tells her it's enough, then he drops his teacup back onto the table. Catching her off guard, he asks if that tea is her favorite, and she responds with a yes. She breaks out into sweat the next minute as she thinks of how cheap the tea is and how as a result it was unsuitable for nobles, but just as she tried to explain herself, only for his voice to suddenly cut her off. He calls the aroma delightful and follows saying he really likes it. She was stunned, and before she could even think to speak, he asked her another question. He asked if she disliked flowers. She responded with a no, then he pointed out an empty vase at the corner and commented that it seemed the maid hadn't done her job properly, asking how an empty vase could be left. His words echo in her mind, and soon she realizes something strange. She doesn't even know when that vase got there, and after taking a closer look, she realizes she's seen it somewhere before. The Grand Duke suddenly mentions there will be a festival in a few days in the city. Flags will be raised, merchants will gather, celebrating prosperity with music. He remarks that the sight of the interwoven flags is rather impressive and adds that he's sure she would enjoy it. She's confident she wouldn't know about such since she hasn't gone out yet, but she was sure it would be so beautiful. However, she clenched her fist and she wouldn't be able to go because she can't get out of there. The Duke mumbles something quite unclear, prompting her to stare at him in confusion. He repeats himself. If life just passed according to what's already been decided, it'd be really boring. In a new scene, Noah steps into his art room. He'd heard a mouse and came to investigate, only to find a grip-on plushie. He looked around trying to find the person behind the gift when it was the highest quality plush, and he knew no one would give such a high-quality gift. That was until his mind went to the Grand Duke. A slight smirk appeared on his lip as he remarked, "That monster, despite coming from humble beginnings, you do have a good eye." He lit the scented candle with such a romantic touch, and in a few minutes the scent filled the entire room and the Gripon plushie's eyes suddenly glowed. The film transitions to Anna, Precip's maid, demanding to know if she's really going out. Precip responds calmly with a yes, noting she must go to the church. In her mind she thinks of how the next event will start soon, and that was her only chance to go. She needed to quickly see if there were any clues. Her maid angrily insists she can't do that. She reminds her that to leave the tower she needs to get the Emperor's permission in advance, but she responds saying it's only 10 minutes from there and she's only going there to pray for the Emperor's well-being. She asks if Anna will prefer to come with her, and she just remains still. Precip interpreted every one of her actions. She was hesitating. She knew she was weighing whether it's safe to send her alone or to come with her. Then her maid suddenly speaks, and she agrees to go with her, asking that she make it a quick visit to the church and back. Precip agrees, thinking of how she'll just blame it all on her sneaking out if they were to get caught anyway. She glances back at the vase and asks Ella if the maids had brought it. However, Ella simply tells her she thought she brought it with her when she entered the tower. She asks if that isn't true and Precip ends up agreeing, claiming it must have just slipped her mind. But in truth she knew, no one brought the vase. She could still remember that day like it was yesterday. At the reincarnation beginning, after dying dozens of times in the harsh prison event, she returned to the tower in tatters. And in the emptiness of the tower, she found it, a vase holding a flower. After experiencing the same harsh things hundreds of times, she found solace in that flower. Now she can't help but question who on earth had brought it. Her maid calls her and she hurried to meet her. She waves it off as just bug, a game with bugs everywhere. At last she arrived at the church. Luckily no one was there. She couldn't imagine what Dietrich would do if she was to get caught. She was caught off guard by a man with blonde hair and dropped to the floor in shock. She hurriedly explains that she hadn't escaped, begging him not to tell Dietrich, promising to be back soon. She opened her eyes to check only to be stunned by the appearance of the man before her. He was handsome, just as much as the Grand Duke, like an angel from a fairy tale. An awkward moment passed between the two of them in silence until he suddenly raised his hand. She snapped out of her daze and instinctively raised her hand to accept his help only for him to pass beside her, leaving her embarrassed on the floor. She got and as she dusted herself she wondered aloud if he could be an NPC related to Siegfried since he came out of the church. She raised her head when she was done only to exclaim in terror. All the statues, not even a single one was intact. Just then her eyes spotted something and she went to pick it up. There was something about the writing on the statue, a part she could interpret herself said, Demon King. She called up the system trying to find information about the item only for it to fail. She stood in the midst of the chaos wondering why anyone would do that when she suddenly heard a loud cry. Naturally she turned her head towards where the noise came from and found the priest standing with his two hands on his head, questioning what she's done to all the holy statues. And then, the realization finally hit her. Later, she sits with the priest trying to explain everything. She tells him how it was her first time visiting the church that day and she had no reason whatsoever to break the statues. The priest then asks if she was saying someone dared try to commit such an act in the middle of the imperial palace, bringing up how the only one was her. She admits she did run into a man at the entrance. She didn't know who he was and his outfit didn't look like that of a priest either. She also didn't see a sword or anything like that, but he did have blonde hair and blue eyes. She promises she's telling the truth. She points at the broken statue from before and asks what kind of statue it was. Since she hasn't received any history education, he found it understandable that she might not know and without hesitation revealed that it depicted a scene from the Ataloya mythology. In the beginning, in the western part of the continent, there lived a calamitous being. It brought plagues, curses, and war. Humanity fought for countless years to eradicate, in that process thousands of heroes and tens of thousands of knights were sacrificed. And then, a hero appeared. One who would permanently subdue that being. He adds that although that happened long before Ataloya was formed, anyone from Ataloya praises that hero. That's why the Subjugation Festival is held every year to commemorate them. Curious, she asks what exactly that being was and he responds. Demon King. People started calling it by that at some point. Her maid arrives, however her expression isn't cheerful at all. She informs Precip the Empress, suddenly says he's unwell. She rushes to her maid immediately and asks what she means and the maid reports that he'd been complaining of a headache since dawn and suddenly collapsed. She went pale, her heart racing as she quietly pondered on everything. Dietrich has never been sick before, so does that mean he suddenly recovered his memories? Ella's expression turns difficult as she hesitantly reveals, the person brought in to replace the Emperor is, the Grand Duke Fenric. He greets her with a smile and reveals that he heard about the church matter from the maid. Immediately he turns to the priest and asks if it isn't a bit too long to hold someone like that no matter how much they're investigating. The priest simply explains that he only wanted to hear an explanation about the situation. The Grand Duke however doesn't let that slide. He retorts that he'd heard immediately after Precip entered the church the Archbishop witnessed the situation and asks if based on the circumstances they shouldn't be questioning the guards outside the church instead. He insists he shouldn't be interrogating an innocent person like that before suddenly asking if it's because she's Precip he dared to do something like that. Okay, guys, the priest tried to speak but the Grand Duke simply turned to Ella and asked her to finish the investigation first. Later, Precip walks with the Grand Duke and at the same time reports everything that had happened to him. She notices he seems lost in his thoughts and calls him. Snapping out of his thoughts, he urges her to please continue. Her cheeks go red as she realizes she must have been talking to herself all along. She thinks of how she hasn't had a chance to relax lately, so she ended up doing it without realizing. She sneaks a glance at the Grand Duke, her mind shifting to how he defended her earlier, and she concludes, this person, it seems like they're more favorable towards me than I thought. They continue walking and she speaks first. This time she thanks him. He asks what she's talking about and she mentions how he helped her. She presses her hand together as she nervously mentions how in the palace there are only people mocking her as the dethroned princess, but he's the first person who's stood by her and she's happy about that. He doesn't respond and she clears her throat wondering if she'd said something unnecessary when he suddenly points out that it seems she's gotten more comfortable now. He brings up the last time they met. She was too nervous to even make eye contact properly, but he thinks now is better. He assures her she has no need to worry about that matter, explaining that since she wasn't involved, even if the Emperor finds out it wouldn't cause any serious troubles. But she simply went silent. She wondered if he really thought like that, thinking, Dietrich, that suspicious person, would never let it go that easily. Leaving aside the matter of the broken statue, he might think she's colluding with someone. Almost like he could see through her, the Grand Duke suddenly pointed out that she seemed doubtful. Then he asked if she would like to make a bet with him. If something troublesome happens because of this, I lose, but if it all passes quietly then you lose, Precip. So the loser has to grant the winner a wish. How does that sound? She responds hesitantly, claiming she doesn't have the ability to grant him a wish, but he just responds telling her she can think about it after hearing him out. She agrees to the Grand Duke's deal. Later, she stood inside the tower and watched as the Grand Duke turned away. Her eyebrows furrowed slightly as she thought of how when that event is over, the storyline would branch and she wouldn't see Fenric anymore. She recalls their parting words. He informed her he had something to ask her maid Ella, so he'll be on his way. It might be the last time. Somehow it feels a bit sad, the only person who was ever kind to her. The scene transitions to Dietrich holding Precip in his arms, calling her name affectionately. At last, finally, I can trust you. He struggled to accept it. He'd never done anything like that. He didn't. He called her name several times until he woke up out of breath. He covered his face as he remarked that it was that nightmare again. Since his last interaction with Precip, he's been having nightmares without fail every single day. Dreams where he kills Precip over and over again. He tightens his fist as he repeats aloud again that he didn't do such a thing. But a question lingered in his mind. Was he certain he didn't? Could it be that that is his true nature? He denied it out loud, but then a memory of Precip calling out to him, assuring him she's never betrayed him, not when she was young or even at that moment or even in the future. He hears someone call him and looks up to find a knight asking if he's back to his senses. He reports that he's been asleep the entire day and tries to go call a doctor. However, Dietrich stops him and asks for a report on what had happened when he was unconscious. The knight without hesitation reports that there was an uproar in the imperial palace that afternoon and he came to report. Some intruder broke into the church and destroyed a statue. However, the first witness was Precip. Her words begin to echo in his mind, how she's never betrayed him, begging him to believe her. Is my suspicion truly pathological? Is Precip connected to that intruder? He immediately questions. A series of questions immediately flooded the Emperor's mind. He wondered if she was preparing to flee again, just like that time. If the destruction of the church was merely a distraction for that purpose, or perhaps his suspicion an illness of the mind. His knight suddenly calls him. This time he informs him a letter has arrived. Handing it to him, he explains that there is no curse magic or any sign of danger, but it doesn't bear a family deal either. The emperor opens the letter, and the minute he begins to read it, her words echo in his mind once again. On the other hand, a maid goes to call Principe. A sigh escapes her lips as a thought settles in her mind. Finally, it has begun, the third event. In a new scene, she stands before the emperor. He begins his statement admitting he has always underestimated her. Clenching the letter in his hand, he mentions that even when confined and monitored in the tower, she found ways to conspire with others. Meanwhile, Principe stood in the middle of the hall with a weird feeling. With no options, she suddenly didn't know how to respond. She doesn't expect him to believe her, but for the first time, she questions if she should speak honestly. He asks her to answer him. His voice rises as he demands she tell him the truth, but her voice comes weirdly calm. She tells him it's unfair. She tells him she's never ever revealed his secrets to anyone, nor has she conspired with anyone. Dietrich cuts in, insisting it's such a vile accusation, while she snaps back, insisting she's telling him the truth. She brings up how she can't even leave, and the only people she can talk to are a few maids in the tower. She asks how she could possibly do such a thing, asking why it's always only he who never understands her. A bitter scoff escapes his lips as he asks if he's supposed to believe that when the Grand Duke suddenly walks in, catching the both of them off guard. Ella trembled behind him while the emperor asked him what was going on, noting the matter didn't concern him. The Grand Duke responds with a calm "no," before suddenly pointing towards Ella and noting she was actually the true culprit. She was the one who actually colluded with the rebels. While investigating the church, he searched the maid's quarters and found a letter written in code. It appeared she'd been exchanging letters with the rebels for quite some time, and claiming to be a loyal servant of Lady Principe was merely a guise to extract information from someone of closest proximity to him. Dietrich rose from his seat in an instant, questioning the absurdity, but the Grand Duke cut him off with a rather terrifying news: Noah Dvern was dead. He was found dead in his mansion, and it appears he was attacked by a beast. However, as he had no close acquaintances, the investigation has hit a wall. The Grand Duke also includes how coincidentally most of his staff were on leave at the time, so his body was discovered far too late. A situation which he remarked to be quite regrettable. The emperor's voice grew louder as he questioned the absurdity of the situation, a beast in the heart of the capital, asking if the Grand Duke himself believed such a thing was possible. The Grand Duke responded with a calm "no." He expanded further on it: a foreign prince being assassinated within the imperial palace, a nobleman mauled to death by a beast in the heart of the capital. Neither can be a mere coincidence. He mentioned the emperor must have heard that Lady Principe witnessed a suspicious figure at the church. He questions aloud if it isn't weird how one individual happens to be at the center of all those events, and yet her closest mate has been proven to have ties with the rebels. The emperor's gaze locks onto him as he asks exactly what he's implying, if he's accusing Principe, but the Grand Duke without further delay reveals, last Principe is being targeted by someone. He continues his speech. He retorts that it seems she's only managed to narrowly escape harm that far, but there's no guarantee she will be so fortunate next time. Therefore, he humbly suggests that for the lady's safety, she be temporarily removed from the palace. Silence falls between them, and when the emperor finally speaks, he insists he wouldn't allow that. He tells the Grand Duke if it is indeed true, it gives him more reason to keep her there, claiming the imperial palace is the safest place in Ataloya. The Grand Duke simply brings up how the first incident had happened in the imperial palace, adding that for all they knew the perpetrator could still be walking freely within those walls. He insists that until the truth is revealed she should stay hidden, away from the palace, returning once her safety is assured. The emperor doesn't change his decision. He notes that she cannot leave, the imperial palace was the safest place for her. But he couldn't kill the doubt in his mind. A part of him wondered if it really was like that. He's in the palace too, isn't he? Can he truly be certain that what happens in his dreams wouldn't spill over to reality? Even now, aren't I considering punishing Principe under suspicion? The memories in his dreams flooded his mind. The time he ordered her to be executed, or to be hanged, while she swore she was innocent. The Grand Duke's gentle reassurance startled the Emperor out of his thoughts. He promised to protect Lady Principe himself. He explained that he had a secluded estate on the outskirts of the capital unknown to most. She could stay there and observe the situation until things settled down. He brought up how he's pledged his loyalty to him since before his ascension. He was the one he could trust above all others. The Emperor quietly testified to this. He was indeed his greatest ally during his rise to the throne. Certainly, he is the most trustworthy person, but still. The Grand Duke, as if noticing his doubt, quickly interrupts. He explains that if word was to spread that the people would begin to speak badly of the lady. If Principe's name were to be on the lips of the people. If public sentiment were to grow that hostile. If that happens, there might be no quiet resolution to that. Principe glances at the Grand Duke in confusion, wondering if he wasn't the Emperor's greatest ally when Dietrich suddenly calls her and asks what it is she wishes to do. "Do you want to leave the palace?" For a moment, it was like time itself paused for her. Leaving the palace? What about the game? What happens next? If she left the tower, she wouldn't be able to use the system anymore. If there's no information outside the palace, then she has no idea what might happen, and if someone was truly targeting her, she wouldn't be able to respond in time. No matter how she looked at it, the risks were high, but even so, there is one reason she wishes to leave the palace. She wants to survive. She agrees to do according to what the Grand Duke has suggested, at least until the danger is gone. "I think Dietrich baby is beginning to get illness of the mind, guys." He accepts and then orders the Grand Duke to move her residence outside the palace. Next, he orders her maid to be imprisoned and interrogated till she confesses everything about the rebels. On the other hand, the Duke turned to Principe and with a smile on his face asked if they could take their leave now. As she walked away with the Grand Duke, Dietrich called out to her one last time. His voice was calm, his eyes didn't hold the usual coldness. He asked tiredly if she perhaps had something to say to him. She looks back in confusion and he, without wasting time, asks if he's misunderstanding her in any way. She goes silent, a new question forming in her mind. Is there a need to clear up your misunderstandings? Even at this point? She says no, she has nothing more to say before taking her leave. In a new scene, she looks out the carriage window while the Grand Duke sits with a smile. Her cheeks were rosy, her eyes sparkling. Everything felt so refreshing. The bustling market, the sweet scent of food, the music wafting from the streets. The sling breeze, the fragrance of flowers. And most of all, not having to endure those wretched events. The Grand Duke, sensing her excitement, gently taps the window, getting the attention of the driver. He gave him one simple order: slow down, reduce your speed, go as slowly as possible. Finally, they arrived at the manor. He explains that they cleaned up in a hurry, admitting he hopes it isn't too humble to host her. She repeated his words in her mind in shock. Humble? That place looked like it could be the grandest in all Ataloya. She's shown to her room, and at the same time the Grand Duke informs her he plans to increase the number of guards by 5-fold starting that day, assuring her she needs not worry about her safety at all. But it didn't seem like she was paying any attention. She rushed straight to her luggage and brought out the vase, placing it gently by the window side. The Grand Duke, noticing this, asks if she brought that personally, informing her there were many vases in the mansion as well, but she simply responds stating that the vase is special to her. The Duke asks if that is so. A memory of him placing a gentle kiss on some flowers before dropping them into a vase pops into his mind. A smile appears on his face as he retorts that whoever gifted it to her must feel very pleased. He extends his arm to the side, almost placing it on her shoulder. However, he quickly restrains himself. He asks if she'd like to visit the garden, adding that they've planted a variety of exotic flowers and trees, suggesting she could pick whichever flowers she liked and place them in the vase. She asks the Grand Duke if he likes flowers by chance, and he responds saying he neither likes nor dislikes them. Although he did go through some trouble to hire gardeners on short notice, then he offers to show her around. Later that evening, she lays in bed asleep while the Duke watches over her, remarks at how she seems to have finally relaxed. He steps out and orders a maid to see to it that no one enters Lady Precepe's room that day, as she seemed to be quite tired. As he walked, a question lingered in his mind. How long have I waited for the day Precepe would arrive here? All the efforts I've poured into this place over such a long time, it was worth it. From behind him, a voice suddenly calls out, "I almost don't recognize the place. It looks like a newly built mansion. Guess you put quite a bit of effort into it?" However, he admits the overwhelming scent of flowers everywhere makes him want to retch, though. Don't you agree? The Grand Duke doesn't respond, but he doesn't stop either. He brings up how he somehow managed to retrieve the griffin and comments that it mustn't have been easy. The Grand Duke, however, simply responds, stating there is nothing in the Empire that he cannot obtain. The blonde-haired guy doesn't stay quiet. Really? Like her? Lowering his head, he adds that it seems a troublesome figure has already taken interest in her, the Imperial Archmage. He discloses, according to what he's heard, that they've already begun investigating at Noah Dvern's mansion. He stepped forward with a smile on his lips as he noted that they'll figure out Noah's signature soon enough, asking if he doesn't feel nervous. The Grand Duke met his gaze defiantly as he told him it doesn't matter, saying after all, Hanan will meet the same ending as Noah Dvern. Before that, he notes he owes him an explanation, and without wasting time immediately demands to know why he'd gone to the church. He asks what his reason was for breaking the statue, pointing out that he'd acted outside of the plan, but the blonde-haired guy simply responds, asking if the results weren't favorable in the end. He leans forward as he stated, thanks to that they now had one more reason to extract Precepe away from the Imperial Palace. He asks him not to push him away as he was helping him there. He taps his shoulder lightly as he asks if everything is going just as he intended before disappearing the next minute. Leaving the Grand Duke muttering insults to him, conniving bastard, he's impossible to predict as always. If I could just kill them all, and be the only choice left for her. On the other hand, the Imperial Archmage, upon finding Noah's taxidermies, he was truly a deranged lunatic. A person suddenly calls his attention to the body, but the Archmage turns him down, saying there's no need to look. The boy reported that it was the most horrifying scene he's ever witnessed, that it looked like a beast tore into his throat as not a single part of his body was left intact. He pointed out something strange, a beast in the heart of the capital? The Archmage agrees with him. He suggests maybe he'd faced revenge from the taxidermied specimens. At that moment, something suddenly caught his eye. He picked up the candle and with a near deranged expression remarks that it appears someone seems to be messing around with them. On the other hand, Precepe wakes up in the Duke estate. At first she found the surrounding unfamiliar until she quickly realized it was the Grand Duke's estate. It wasn't a dream, she'd really left the Imperial. She tried using the system, however, just as she suspected, it didn't work. That didn't matter to her because the information she already had was enough, and all that remained was the Book of Memories, however without the protagonist's real name. As she ponders silently, something suddenly catches her attention. She walks over to the window, unable to resist the sight of the neatly arranged flowers in the vase. She questioned aloud how long it's been there, and a maid informs her it was placed there the previous evening by the Grand Duke himself. A maid walks out and greets her. She informs her she will be her attendant from then on, asking her to inform her if she has any concerns. Before Precepe could properly respond, she rushed her with a lot of questions. She asks how she slept, explaining that she'd picked out the blanket with great care. She asks if she should prepare her meal or if she would like to take a shower first, and she decides to go with the shower. Hannah stared at her in silence before suddenly throwing her arms around her, confessing that she's waited for so long to meet her, and in that moment she was so overjoyed. At the same time, in the Northern Magic Tower, Commander Siegfried, Grand Duke Fenric, and the Archmage all gathered together to discuss the case of Noah. The Archmage, without wasting any time, reveals Noah was actually murdered, and as proof, he dropped a simple flower on the table. In truth, that flower was actually a magical herb called moonlit grass. Rare enough that no one knows about it, a kind of hallucinogen known to induce a near comatose sleep when consumed. That was common knowledge, however for monsters, it was different. Not only does it wake the sleeping, it is said to even revive the dead, of course temporarily. He points to the scented candle on the table and reveals that it was found in Noah's house. Although most of it was destroyed, traces of moonlit grass were mixed in. Someone deliberately used that herb and monsters to kill Noah, that much was certain. Furthermore, that plant only grew in the forbidden forest. Siegfried exclaims in shock and the Archmage responds coldly asking if he has to shout before he understands something. He explains that it is the place abandoned by the gods, the monster's den. He asks if Siegfried hasn't been there under the pretext of hunting plenty of times, so he must be quite familiar with the area. Under such circumstances, Siegfried remarks that it's hard to believe the killer was an ordinary person. It had to be someone skilled enough to handle monster specimens and freely traverse the forbidden forest. Siegfried, confused, then asks why such a person would target Noah and the Archmage responds asking how he would know, saying that's for him to figure out. Siegfried called the Grand Duke. He brings up Lady Precip's encounter with a strange person and suggests they investigate him first. The Grand Duke agrees and Siegfried casually mentions the Emperor seems deeply distressed ever since Precip left the palace. Since they're on it, the Archmage asks if Precip will return to the palace once the matter is resolved. Both the Archmage and the commander get into an argument right in front of him over Precip. They each argue, trying to show more care for Precip while the Grand Duke sits with surprised annoyance. Until he speaks telling them that's not something they should concern themselves with. Why are you curious? They both stare at him stunned while the Grand Duke asks if they're both thinking like that even though an intruder could still be inside the palace right at that moment. Siegfried agrees and apologizes, promising to focus more on the investigation while the Grand Duke asks him to report to him immediately if there's progress in the inquiry before taking his leave. At his absence the Archmage brings up his foul mood while Siegfried responds suggesting his long-standing relationship with the Emperor. It's understandable he'd be on edge. The next minute Siegfried rises, he asks the Archmage to send the knights to the villages near the forest, examining that depending on how the investigation goes they might need to request help from the mages at the tower. The Archmage responds with a question asking if there are still villages near the forest commenting that they must enjoy living dangerously since monsters keep on popping out from time to time. Siegfried however mocks him. He says that he sounds like a sheltered mage cooper up in a tower. He told him he was out of touch with reality before finishing off finally saying there was once a time when monster attacks were frequent. He explains that in recent years, the number of monsters venturing out of the forest has significantly decreased and the nearby villages have been repopulated as a result while the forest itself remains a restricted zone. On the other hand the Grand Duke rides in his carriage. He drifted into thought, a few minutes later. As expected, it's clear now, even though he removed Precip from the palace early on to avoid crossing paths with them, their instinctual interest persists. As if the gods themselves have bound them together. They've forgotten what they've done. Only Precip bears the memories of their actions, suffering silently while they obliviously inflict new wounds. How much must the cycle of fate twist, before they let Precip go? They arrive at his mansion and to his surprise the first sight that greets him is of Precip enjoying the sight of the flower. Her outstretched hand immediately pulled him back to the past. She extended that same hand to him before, just like that. He walks up to her and asks if she likes his mansion. She responds immediately saying she loves it and he responds saying he's glad to hear that. He asks her to look around as there were many sights to see also inside the mansion. He tells her there's a library with books from across the continent and also in her room she'll find clothes and jewelries as well. Sensing her hesitation he asks if something is the matter, if Hannah hadn't given her the proper tour and she quickly explains that she did. It's just, it all feels too much for someone like her. She's never been treated like that, not even in the imperial palace. The Duke's kindness, Hannah's affection for me, it's a bit too overwhelming. I have nothing to offer in return. The Grand Duke simply retorts that her happiness alone was already enough to repay their kindness. He continues and shares that if she says it's too much it would be truly disheartening. She stares at him stunned. She admits she's never thought herself as someone who deserved those kind of treatment, but he just responds telling her she never knows. It's possible that even if she's forgotten because it seemed insignificant, someone else might still be living because of that fleeting moment she gave them. Silence falls between them for a while until she breaks it with a suddenly questions, asking if he's ever experienced something like that, and he says yes. After all, he was born a commoner. He continues saying he didn't even know who his parents were. One day he'd be begging for scraps, the other he'd be beaten black and blue. It was the kind of life one would expect, and he just assumed he'd die on the streets just like that. That was until his 13th birthday. Something happened that completely changed his life. She'd naturally assumed he was a noble due to his overwhelming presence, but even as an NPC, he has such a backstory. A smile appears on her face as she praises him, saying he must have gone through so much and yet he's achieved all that, calling it truly amazing. The simple mutters, "Is that so?" Deep inside him he couldn't accept it. If it hadn't been for her, he'd still be stuck in that alleyway. Later, she sat in her room trying to figure out what was wrong. The Grand Duke all of a sudden seems different. There was something peculiar about his mood. She called herself back. She knew now wasn't the time to dwell on that. Instead, she needed to hurry and investigate. The game has an ending date, also known as the Day of Choice. On that day, she would need to select one make protagonist and confirm whether she's achieved a successful ending or not. To reach the system maximum affection score of 100, she must spend the day with the chosen male character and make the right final choice. If she chooses the wrong final option and fails to reach 100 points, it will result in a bad ending. Even if she picks the correct one, a lack of overall points will still lead to a bad ending. Right now she still remained unsure of who the real male protagonist was. She pondered on what she might have overlooked, what details she might have missed, a memory so insignificant that she might have forgotten. And she got one. The tutorial. If the male protagonist isn't someone in within Imperial Palace, then the only clue lies there. Episodes that covered Precepe's life, from age 10 to 15. She was only able to view it once when she got pulled into that world. Thinking back now, she's repeated the main story thousands of times and memorized it all. However, the tutorial, she's almost completely forgotten about it. But it definitely ended when her mother was executed at age 15. Just before her execution, she said, "Precepe, listen to me carefully, you must, so therefore." She couldn't remember exactly what she said. Either way, she realizes if the person she's looking for is outside the palace, then she can't handle that on her own. A thought suddenly comes to her. Should I ask for help after all? Later, she steps into the Grand Duke's room only to find without a shirt on. She turns around immediately after apologizing and immediately suggests coming back later. However, the Grand Duke suddenly appeared behind her, assuring her it's fine and she may come in. He asks why she's there and she reveals she was wondering if she may borrow a map. He glances at her as he repeats the word and she immediately searches for an excuse. She explains that since she's been confined to the tower for too long, she's gotten curious about the outside world. The Grand Duke responds saying he sees, then he tells her he'll guide her the next morning. She thanks him, but just then her eyes notices something. She stares so long that he notices and asks if tattoos aren't so common amongst nobles and if that was her first time seeing one. She asks if it's a tree and he says yes, adding that he'd drawn each leaf by hand. To be precise, he adds a new leaf every time he experiences something painful. It's to strengthen his resolve and to remind himself not to forget the emotions he felt in those moments. Her eyes lost in its beauty, she remarks that it's beautiful. The Grand Duke suddenly calls her name as he darts towards her. When their faces are barely apart from each other, he speaks. "Lady Precepe, there's something I'd like to ask of you." Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and also leave a comment if you'd like to see part 2. Thank you for your support, guys. I really appreciate it.